There was no better story in college football in 2022 than the rise of TCU. After not even making a bowl game last year, the Horned Frogs hired a new head coach and even benched Max Duggan in favor of another quarterback to start the season. Chandler Morris was expected to take over, but after getting hurt, Duggan's name would be called upon, and this would be one of the best things to ever happen to the TCU program. Duggan led them to an undefeated regular season before they eventually lost to Kansas State in the Big 12 championship. This would not end their national title hopes though, as they would go on to get selected to the college football playoff, and Duggan ended up finishing second in Heisman voting. He truly is one of the craziest stories in college football this year, as he went from one of the top Iowa high school quarterbacks ever to someone who struggled with injuries, got benched multiple times during his career, and at one point had a heart problem that could have ended his life. Today, we're going to talk about the insane and impossible rise of Max Duggan and tell his story. I'm really excited for this one, but before we get started, we're so close to 100k, so be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player I should cover next. Now, let's get started. Going back in time, Max grew up watching players such as RG3 and Jameis Winston, and dreamed of one day making it to the podium. Duggan said, quote, "It's a dream come true. It's something as a little kid you wish while watching the Heisman ceremony that one day you can be up there." The Duggan family was made up of 5 people, which included his mom and dad, and 2 adopted older siblings from North Korea. Athletics also ran in the family, as his father set passing records as a quarterback at South Dakota, and his mother was a standout hurdler at South Dakota as well. Max was born and raised in the western Iowa city of Council Bluffs, which is a suburb of Omaha, and from a young age, Duggan was going to be a quarterback. His dad was a local and legendary high school coach in the area, and as he got better and better, he befriended future Kansas State quarterback Jake Waters. Max said, quote, "He knows everything about the game. He was literally a student of the game. He overachieved as an athlete, and a lot of people didn't think he could do it, and it was exciting to watch him play at high school under my dad." Jake was a huge inspiration to Max and proved to him that he could achieve whatever he set out to do. When he became a freshman at Lewis Central High School in Council Bluffs, Duggan was ready to take over. While playing 4 different sports, Max earned early offers from many big-time programs after combining for 45 touchdowns in his first 2 years as the starting quarterback. He'd eventually develop into a blue-chip 4-star player, but where would he end up going? Well, he'd have a pretty crazy recruitment. One story in particular was very interesting. One weekend, the Duggan family rented out a van, and they were supposed to go on an SEC tour. They were going to visit schools such as Georgia, Alabama, and Ole Miss, but the car would end up getting rear-ended, and the family suffered from whiplash. Thankfully, no one really got hurt that bad, and Duggan was still able to throw, but this was the start of unlucky and unfortunate events that would happen to Duggan before he would shine. Schools such as Minnesota, Ole Miss, North Carolina, Nebraska, and Iowa State began to emerge, but one school down in Texas would close the gap and eventually get him to commit. But before that, he would officially visit Minnesota, Notre Dame, and Ohio State, and he didn't know where he was going to go. He said, quote, "If I'm being honest, it switches for me every day. It's a very difficult decision, and I'll have a top 3 when I wake up and go to bed with a different one." I guess things changed and solidified for him, as eventually he made a shocking move, and the best Iowa quarterback recruit since Kyle Orton was going to be headed to TCU. But why the Horned Frogs? He said, quote, "My approach to this was very offensive oriented. He asked if his skill set would fit with theirs, and he was also looking at the people he was surrounded by. The coaching staff was extremely important to him, and getting along with everyone on the team was extremely important to him. I couldn't find a lot of details on why he went to TCU, but I assume they checked those boxes, and that's why he became a Horned Frog. He was definitely a coach's son, and with his legendary father as the coach, he put Lewis Central football on the map. He led them to their first state semifinal performance, and he had eye-popping numbers. Before the playoffs, he had career totals of 5,757 yards, 2,693 rushing yards, and 110 combined touchdowns. His quarterback coach knew he had all the intangibles. He said, quote, "You can just really tell he understands the game. It's his attention to detail when it comes to his football IQ. He understands progressions, and he has that automatic clock that goes off when he needs to deliver the ball or take off and run." Whatever it is, he had. According to 24/7 Sports, Duggan was a 4-star recruit, the number 5 dual-threat quarterback, the number 1 player in Iowa, and the 229th best player in the class of 2019. So how would the Iowa high school phenom do down in Fort Worth? When Max arrived at TCU, they were fresh off of the Kenny Hill era. Duggan would join a loaded quarterback room that included blue-chip recruit Justin Rogers, former blue-chip recruit Sean Robinson, and Michael Collins. So yeah, he was going to have a lot of work cut out for him to win the job. Eventually though, Duggan was actually named the starter for the 2019 season, and he'd get an opportunity to play in 10 games. Duggan would make his first big start on the road against Purdue in week 2, where he'd lead them to a 34-13 win. After that, he'd throw 3 touchdowns in a loss to SMU, before he'd throw 2 touchdowns in his first career conference win over Kansas. From there, he was on and off. While he did lead them to an upset victory over number 15 Texas, he had back-to-back games with 3 interceptions and losses to Baylor and Oklahoma State, and he really struggled with turnovers as a freshman. I mean, that was to be expected, and while there was some mistakes, there was also a lot of flash. He finished with 2,077 yards passing, with 15 touchdowns and 10 picks, and also had 555 yards on the ground and 6 touchdowns. 2020 was going to be a huge year for Duggan, except this is when things would get scary. Before the start of the 2020 season, a previously unknown heart issue was discovered inside of Duggan, and doctors found that he had Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. This condition causes the heart to beat abnormally fast for periods of time and was actually life-threatening. 2 days after that procedure to fix the heart issue, he would need emergency surgery because of a blood clot. At that time, there was a chance that Duggan could pass away, and football was the least of his worries. Thankfully, he would make a full recovery and got a chance to ball out in the 2020 season. His best game came against Iowa State, as he threw for 241 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also led them to an upset victory over number 9 Texas on the road, and also had 3 touchdowns and a win over Kansas. He finished his sophomore campaign with 1,795 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 4 picks, with another 500 yards and 10 scores on the ground. Duggan was an above-average quarterback who seemed to be getting better and better. In 2021, Duggan was once again named the starter, and he got off to a hot start. He combined for 9 touchdowns in his first 3 games, which included a 2-point victory over Cal and a 1-possession loss to SMU. He ended up struggling in a home loss to Texas before he'd have the best game of his 3-year career to that point. On the road against number 4 Oklahoma, Duggan would throw for 346 yards with 4 touchdowns and no interceptions. This game ended up putting him on the map, but he would battle a nagging injury throughout the entire season, and Chandler Morris got an opportunity to put up big numbers against Baylor, making some wonder if Morris was the better option long term. Duggan would finish with 2,048 yards with 16 touchdowns and 6 picks, and another 352 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Little did anyone know, he was in so much pain behind the scenes. He broke a bone and tore a tendon in one of his feet, but he didn't wear a boot because he didn't want people around campus to know he was hurt. He couldn't practice because the pain was so bad, and they would shoot painkillers into him just so he could get through the game. Duggan was an absolute fighter, so that's why when Coach Dykes came in, there was no question whether he'd be sticking around no matter what would happen. Chandler Morris ended up being named the starter going into the 2022 season, and while many players would hit the portal, Duggan did not want to be anywhere else, and he was going to prepare for his opportunity. Unfortunately, at the expense of Morris, Duggan would get his chance just halfway into the first game. Duggan would come in relief against Colorado, but the following week would throw for 390 yards and 5 touchdowns and a win over Tarleton State. Yeah, they were a nobody, but that was still an insane stat line. After 3 more touchdowns against SMU, TCU was undefeated and was starting to look legit, and they would get 4 straight tests to see if they were the real deal. He combined for 5 touchdowns and 400 yards in a blowout victory over number 18 Oklahoma, had 400 yards and 4 touchdowns in a crazy win over Kansas, and then had a combined 400 yards in a 43-40 double overtime victory against Oklahoma State. At this time, TCU was becoming a national story, and they just kept climbing back from the dead. After that, he would then throw 3 touchdowns in a victory over number 17 Kansas State, led them to a gutsy win over West Virginia, had them held on against Texas Tech, before he'd have a big test on the road against Texas. This was by far Duggan's worst game of the season, but despite his poor performance, they would still beat number 18 Texas 17-10, and the undefeated season went on. The Baylor game was unbelievably impressive, as he would lead them on a comeback, which resulted in a game-winning field goal. They were undefeated going into their final game, and he put the icing on the cake with a blowout with 3 touchdowns and a blowout victory over Iowa State. TCU is now headed to the Big 12 championship. Unfortunately, in that game, despite an insane effort from Duggan, they would end up losing as they put the ball in the running back's hands in overtime, and they lost 31-28. Despite that loss, TCU was still only a 1-loss team, and they were going to get a chance to go to the college football playoff. But before that, Duggan had another award to win. He ended up finishing 2nd overall in total votes for the Heisman Trophy, and while he probably never was going to win it, Duggan definitely had the heart of a Heisman winner. The guy was absolutely insane, as he now was going to get a chance to play in the college football playoff. Last night was a mixed bag from Duggan. While he did have 300 yards and 4 combined touchdowns, he also had 2 costly interceptions and was not all that accurate. Ultimately, though, it didn't really matter, as they ended up winning 51-45 over number 2 Michigan, and no one saw this coming. The Horned Frogs now have an opportunity to play in the national championship game, and that is because of Duggan. season. They went from having a losing record last year to now potentially a national title. This is absolutely bonkers if you think about it, and provides so much hope, and is such a breath of fresh air in a world filled with the portal and a lot of off-the-field drama. On the year, Duggan has 3,546 yards with 40 combined touchdowns. He'll likely get a chance in the NFL as a late-round pick, but no matter what, he will cement his legacy in the college football and in the TCU world after an insane 2022 season. No matter what happened to him, he always bounced back, and it's a story that can inspire us all, and I can't wait to see what he does next week against Georgia. Win or lose in that game, Duggan could be considered the winner of the year in college football. But what do you guys think? If you're a TCU fan, what do you think of Duggan? What player should I cover in my next video? And before you go, be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about the rise of Quentin Johnston. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.